And we are here with Unstrung Heroes. I'm Sheri Menelli with Ron Menelli, and we've got Aiden Mullen today. Aiden has quite the resume. Oh my gosh. Bass and guitar tech, stage manager, rack systems, pedal board design. You're almost on 40 years in the industry.
Yeah.
You've been with Def Leppard, which that's who you're out with now, Aerosmith, Peter Frampton, Phil Collins, INXS, Metallica, Matchbox 20, Hall & Oates, Guns N' Roses, Disturbed, Sammy Hagar, Kid Rock. You were an amp specialist and artist relations for Mesa Boogie amplifiers. And then you did some guitar adjuster quality inspection for Gibson guitars. Did I forget anything there?
No, I hope not.
All right. So let's start off here with a good unstrung hero story. Do you have any funny or, I don't know, whatever kind of stories?
I did a stint with INXS back in 2004, 2005. And I'd just like to say for the record that those fellas are some of the nicest folks I've ever met. So we were in the middle of a European tour, and some of the dates left a bit to be desired. We weren't doing large venues. We were doing a lot of small theaters, some outdoor shows, great gigs, all of them. And then we ventured into Eastern Europe. And at one point, I worked for two guys in the band, Tim Ferriss and Gary Beers, the guitar player and bass player. And Timmy one day decided that he had a lovely old Telecaster that was his favorite guitar, and he wanted a Bigsby tailpiece installed on this guitar. But he decided to do it while we were rehearsing in Sofia, Bulgaria, in a little church meeting room next to an outdoor World War II war museum that was acres and acres of German planes and all manner of cool stuff. But the working conditions were less than desirable. And we were over there. I had my little fold out ultra case roadie box. It's all I had. I had a couple of hand tools and a polish cloth and some polish and a pair of cutters and a string winder. And that's all I was traveling with. And he decided he had to have this Bigsby tailpiece installed on this guitar. So I started trying to figure this out at a rehearsal day and ended up using a wine cork, like a corkscrew that has the little flip knife on the other end for cutting the foil on a bottle of wine. I literally cut the holes in the body of the guitar with that little corkscrew foil knife. And it took hours. I had it sitting on my lap and I'm digging into the body of this guitar and I slip. I stuck the thing in my stomach. So I stabbed myself installing this Bigsby tailpiece and got to visit a Bulgarian medical facility. We got the Bigsby installed on the guitar and it worked.
So how long were you in the Bulgarian?
No, not long. Long enough to get, butterflied up and cleaned up and taped up and patched and sent on my way.
How much blood did you end up with on the guitar?
None on the guitar, but enough on my clothes that it had me worried for a minute. Those blades are, what are they, about almost an inch long, So I stabbed myself.
Wow. Wounded in the line of action.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounded like you needed some kind of armor or something to use. You probably could have found some around there somewhere.
Very likely. If I'd have known I'd needed it, I would have looked for it.
Yeah, perhaps an actual workbench or something would have been nice.
Or something like that. Yeah, maybe a proper work case or something. Yeah. But we kind of do that. We kind of do whatever it takes to make a reasonable request. And I mean, that was a reasonable request, him asking me to put that tailpiece on the guitar.
So I guess it was blood, sweat, and tears, huh?
We did. And not in that order necessarily, but yes.
We've got all these really cool photos. Let's go to the photos and have you talk about some of the rigs you've been working with. All right, there you are.
My friend Fred Kowalo, who is Nikki Sixx's bass tech, took this for me at our last show in Melbourne, Australia. I wanted to send you guys a pic that you could use for this. that, shows my controller there. Underneath it is my bass rig and my pedal rig. And when we go to the next couple of photos, I'll be able to explain a little bit more about what that pedal rig means, because that's something that a lot of people don't really know about.
Okay.
Rick Savage, the guy that I work for, has given me over the years pretty much carte blanche. He's been very trusting of me when it comes to putting gear together. I've done it over the course of the years. Their music is complex. The sounds, the textures are all complex. And they pride themselves on giving their audience the absolute best sounding show they can do every night. And that's due in part to Ronan McHugh, their front of house engineer, who works very closely with them and with us to develop this technology. And, as you know, technology now has just gone crazy in terms of what's out there and what's available and how it can be utilized. So that photo there just kind of shows that's mission control for me. That handles everything. It switches programs on the bass. We use the Fractal AXFX 3s for all of the instruments on stage. And then I have a separate rig in there that is Mac based, running main stage for 3 sets of on stage Roland PK5A MIDI pedals that Sav will play in different locations throughout the show. And he triggers sounds. He triggers mostly low-end drone samples, things that kind of fill in the bottom end. There are a few where you'll hear an intro that he triggers with these pedals. There's a couple of others. There's one sound in a new song called Take What You Want that is kind of a very lush vocal harmony bit, but it's defined within this part of the song that he does kind of a bass solo over the top of it. And I need to stress right out of the gate that over the years, Def Leppard have been accused of having backing vocal tracks running during their show. And not only do they not, they never have, and they absolutely insist that they never will. The only samples that are happening on that stage come from my rack. Even though we're running time code now that interfaces with video, and it's a time-consuming thing to put together, and it's really advanced in many ways, but they're still an old school rock and roll band, and they do it that way. They just use this new technology to produce the best sounds that they can possibly produce every night. I do less with the bass guitar than I do with the rest of that stuff. We have an A rig, a B rig, and a C rig. And the idea is that we can run them around the world, alternate use, save extraordinary amounts of money by sending a rig over in a sea container to Europe while we're in Australia with another rig, or vice versa. That one there is the smallest of my 3. That would be for air freight. That would be for TV shows, award shows, anywhere where a smaller footprint is a necessity. Like that would be something that I'd take to do Good Morning America or Jimmy Kimmel Live. And I think there's another photo that I sent you right there. So that right there, that's during setup for Jimmy Kimmel, the beginning of 2022, I think. We did that early in the year. But that's all 3 guys. That's my rig on the left, Phil Collins' rig in the middle, and Vivian Campbell's rig on the right-hand side.
I love it.
So the other 2 guys use the GT22s. I use the 16. They have a little bit more going on during the show than I do in terms of guitar sounds. So that's why they have the larger pedal boards. So that's cool. All 3 guys together right there.
Wow.
And you can see that we're all using the AXFX 3s. We have a main and a spare in each rig. So poor Matt Picone at Fractal back in 2018, when I came back to Def Leppard, I got an email that says we're transitioning from our current analog structure into using the AXFX units So you're going to need to get up to speed on that pretty quickly. And they were just starting to use the AXFX 2, which at the time was the most current. And at that time, the early days of 2018, this would have been January, February, March, in that area. Phil was out with
Joe Satriani and who?
John Petrucci.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Okay.
So with Phil, and the three of them were traveling around doing this G3 tour. So Phil was walking down a hallway one day, and he heard John playing guitar from behind this door, and was immediately, enthralled in what he was hearing. And he went in, and John was playing prototype AXFX 3. And Phil heard this thing and went, "We have to have those." So within maybe 3 weeks, we had decided to scrap the AXFX 2 XLs, of which we had a bunch at that point. I'd just come back to Def Leppard after being gone for a couple of years, and had developed these bass sounds for Sav based on what I remember hearing. And I was pretty proud of what I came up with. Sounded great. They sent me the units at home. I programmed them at home with a bass in the kitchen with headphones, and then sent them back to LA, and then everything changed. And I'm glad it did, because the AXFX 3s are extraordinary. You can't take the programs from the 2XL and dump it into the 3.
Oh no.
Right. Yeah,
Oh,
they're
yes.
very different from each
They
other.
are
Yeah.
very different in every way: hardware, software, firmware, everything. So now it was, okay, do it again.
Oh.
and oh, by the way, the band's going to be here in a week.
Oh.
So again, that's one of those moments where you just kind of say, okay, we got to make it happen. We did. And over the course of 2018, 2019, we really got the hang of it. We were really, and we were using them with analog outs at that point still. We hadn't pushed to the next level, which is all digital sound consoles for monitors and for front of house. So we got into the 3s, got some really cool sounds, but poor Matt Picone. So we have A rig, B rig, and C rig times 2 guitar players and a bass player times 2 for a main and a spare. So when we called Matt, it was like, "Matt, we need 18 AXFX 3s stat." And, he wasn't, he was thankful, and he made it happen. And,
wow.
And so we got them all put together. We rolled out. I think we were touring with Journey at that point, doing arenas and stadiums in the States. And it immediately became clear that we had made the right decision, because every stinking night, that gear sounded exactly the same. And, it cut out all the tweaking during line check and sound check. It cut out why does my guitar sound different on this song? Or is this the B rig? Because something sounds different. And now we can say, "Hey man, I got everything on a USB stick. It sounds exactly like it did on the last rig."
Wow.
And now we've delved into a complete digital process. The AES format that is available on the AXFX units is a 3-pin XLR connector, but it's 2 channels of digital output. Now our consoles are capable of utilizing that format. So there are no analog lines anymore coming from us, coming from the drums. It's just, microphones basically. And a few of the set is all triggers. So it's just a couple of overhead mics, I think a kick drum mic, and maybe a snare mic. I'm not sure, but that's literally the extent of the analog. Oh, and the acoustic guitar that my guy plays for a half a song on a Gracie stand is also an analog signal. And that's literally it. And it's amazing. It's amazing how it sounds.
So I see a lot of GTs. I know you've got the 3 there, and then also the drummer has one. I'm just wondering what made you guys all decide to get the GTs. I don't know if I ever heard that story.
I want to say I can't personally take credit for that because, in fact, I was the last one to make that happen. When I came back in 2018, they had already made the transition for the 2 guitar players. So I was still using, that's Rick Allen's rack there a minute ago. We saw that one right there. I jokingly refer to that as the drum set, because what you're looking at there is Mac Minis with a sample library that is simply extraordinary. And there's some time code stuff in there too that I'm totally unfamiliar with. I'm not qualified to talk on that at all. But the idea Leopard show utilizes the samples from the records that any given song comes from. So when you hear the song Love Bites, you're actually hearing the snare drum you would have heard on the radio or on the record, the CD, same kick drum, tom-toms, any of that. So that's what's going on there. And the GT, basically, he steps through songs. So he'll call up Foolin' and you'll have the drum kit from that song on the Pyromania record. You know, Pour Some Sugar on Me has some obvious drum sounds. So with the combination of the Axe Effects units and this drum rig the way it is, you go to a Def Leppard show and you honestly, you hear what you expect to hear. You don't hear a facsimile. You don't hear a mess that they're trying to polish up and make sound more like the record. It truly, the amount of time that we spend developing individual sounds, and that's with a drum sound or a guitar sound or a bass sound or a sample for my pedals, we do hear on a regular basis. And I give, again, credit where credit is due, in large part to Ronan McHugh, who is the band's front of house engineer. He's also their producer, one of Joe's best friends in Dublin, and just a really good fella, you know, and he works really hard on a daily basis to make their show sound the best that it can. And it's extraordinary. It really is.
You had told me a really funny story last night when we were chatting about Spinal Tap.
I worked for Mesa Boogie, as you mentioned earlier, during the 80s. I'm from Northern California originally, and Mesa Boogie is based in Petaluma. They make an extraordinary line of amplifiers. I'm also a guitar player myself, and I have a couple of their old amps still to this day. So my job there was I would play test amplifiers back in the back warehouse before they would be boxed up and shipped out. That was kind of fun. I was responsible for the NAMM show display. So, you know, we would go down every January and show our wares and, you know, talk to people and hopefully sell some product, but mainly, you know, put faces with names. And we would have a pretty good time with it. One of the things that I don't know now, I haven't been to a NAMM show in a few years, but they usually have events in different hotels, in ballrooms and conference rooms where they have people play. And it just so happens that at this one NAMM show that I was attending, Spinal Tap were playing at the Disneyland Hotel in Anaheim. And for quite a while, I started working with him in 1986. So he lived close by, lived in Novato, California at the time.
Wait, sorry, you had cut out. Who lived close by from Novato?
James Hetfield.
Okay, got it.
So he decided to come down to the NAMM show. And we spent some time together walking around, you know, as you do, saying hi to people, thanking people, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, having a few cocktails. And so he and I went to see Spinal Tap. And it was the full-on thing. It was like being in the movie. And I was totally surprised that they're as good as they are. They were unbelievably brilliant. And so we were fans. We were just, you know, drinking and carrying on and hooting and hollering. So a guy just comes up to me and taps me on the shoulder. And I turned to look at him and I realized that I was looking at Steve Lukather. And I said, hi. And he said, hey, man, I see you're with James Hetfield. I've always wanted to meet him. Could you introduce me to him, please? And I said, man, you're Steve Lukather.
Doesn't need an introduction, I don't think.
They had a great conversation. And so the three of us stood there for the rest of the show, one after another. It was back in the day when James was still drinking, and it was kind of what you did back then. So we had a fantastic time, and Spinal Tap were absolutely amazing. They're a real band. They really do that stuff.
It's kind of funny. It's like the one band that all the rock stars would want to go see, right? Because everyone, it seems like the more you're in the rock and roll industry, the more you appreciate Spinal Tap.
Yeah. And you would expect the musicianship, they're actors, right? The musicianship was amazing. The guitar tones were amazing. The guitars were amazing. The amps were amazing. It was all amazing. And it was not at all what I expected. I expected it to be a comedy show with a little bit of music thrown in, but it was a Spinal Tap concert, and they were in character the entire time.
Yeah, I got to see them once when they did their Break Like the Wind tour. It's like, I think it was the very early 90s, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was an awesome show. It was a lot of fun.
Excellent. Yeah. So that was a fun night. That was a fun night.
Kind of funny that Lukather wanted you to introduce him to I know this puts you on the spot. Can you think of any other really funny stories or unstrung hero moments or things going wrong badly and you having
most of my unstrung moments involve pain of one kind or another. I tend to be a little bit clumsy, and I really have to think before I move. Unfortunately, in this business, there are times where you don't have that option. Something goes wrong and you need to address it very quickly. And I think back, I want to say we were in Canada. Def Leppard was in Canada. We were playing one of many ice arenas where they put a material called Homosote. It's an 8x4 sheet, dense fabric kind of material that covers the ice so that you can build a stage on top of it. You put seats on top of it. People can walk on it. When you're touring in the wintertime in Canada, there's ice in these hockey arenas. Someone had used bits and pieces of that to level out a couple of the legs of the stage in the back, across the back of the stage. And there were black curtains. And when the house lights go down, it gets very dark in these buildings, except for on stage. And I am typically off stage in an arena environment. I'm on the floor, and I don't remember what went wrong. I just remember something going horribly wrong. And I had to get to the other side of the stage as quickly as possible. So I went upstage and at a run now, took a turn, went to run across the back of the stage in the dark, pretty much. But there were these pieces of Homosote sticking out from under the legs of the stage in various amounts. There was no rhyme or reason to it. It was just bits and pieces.
So
I tumbled.
You tumbled? Oh no.
I went off the edge of one of those pieces of Homosote. It's about an inch thick. Destroyed my left ankle, rolled my left ankle, tumbled over, did a flip, landed on the concrete behind the ice, dislocated my shoulder, and slid to a stop inches from the steel truck ramp that came down off the middle of the back of the stage, where we would go up and down with the cases of the gear, and we would walk up and down this truck ramp.
Oh.
And I'm laying in the dark. I know that I've damaged myself at this point, and I couldn't move. I couldn't get up. Show's going, and all I can think of was, crap, I really needed to get over there. And now I can't, I'm cooked. I'm laying on the ground. Our tour manager actually witnessed the whole thing. He happened to be coming around behind the curtain when he saw me go down. So the next thing you know, I'm surrounded by production manager, tour manager, 2 EMTs, a couple of other guys, a couple of our crew members, a couple of local guys, the local promoter. They're all looking down at me like this guy's killed himself, you know? So the EMTs began looking at me. And what had actually happened was, as I flipped and I landed on my shoulder and I dislocated the shoulder, as I came back around the other way and landed on it again, it pushed it back in. So
wow.
I guess from what everybody tells me, that's the most unpleasant way to have your shoulder reset. It still bothers me from time to time, but at that point they just kind of, they bound me up. But the point of the story is the show must always go on, I guess. And I could have just said, screw it. You know, they wanted me to go to the hospital. They had a stretcher, the whole bit. And I said, no, you need to get me back over there. I asked the tour manager to go tell the monitor engineer, whatever it was, I had likely forgotten at that point that was so important. And they brought me around because I push buttons during the show. We all push buttons during the show. Our guys are up there and we're in charge of making things sound different. So they brought me around. They went and got a wheelchair. They got me into a wheelchair. I ended up finishing the show with one hand. And I want to say, now at that point, I want to say that's what it was. It was sticks. I remember that. So one of the other band guys ran the basses up and down the stairs for me while I sat and pushed the buttons in agony, just absolute agony. And then as soon as the show was done, rather than do the wheelchair, our production manager put me on a road case and had 2 guys push me out to the ambulance.
That's a very tech way to go. You know, it's like just shove you on a road case and haul you out.
Yep. So they took me to the hospital. I had destroyed my left ankle. I was in a sling for the shoulder. I was banged up. I was bruised. I was in one of those compression boots on crutches. We had a show the next day, you know. So we went to do our load in, and then somebody got the flu. This was way pre-COVID. Somebody got the flu and we canceled the last couple of shows in Canada. So, you know, I'm on crutches trying to tell people where to put stuff and stack this and do that. And then they came and said, the show's off. We're going to go home for a week or 2. So I got to go home and see a doctor at home and get fixed up just by chance.
That is pretty wild. Wow.
It's just one of those things where you're faced with absolute adversity sometimes, and you have to make a show happen. You know, trucks crash and gear gets destroyed. One of the first major tours, probably my first major tour, was Master of Puppets with Metallica. And we were in Europe in February, January, wintertime, the dead of winter. And the brake lines in these trucks were notorious for freezing. So the trucks would be disabled, you know. And I want to say it was Copenhagen. It was somewhere like that. I'd have to go back somewhere. I actually have an itinerary from that tour. But our backline truck wasn't going to make the show. And we went to a little music store and rented everything we could and bought everything else we couldn't rent to try to get guitars and amps and things and all this stuff. I have a little string winder. Oh, it was in Sweden. I have a little string winder that I bought that day, and I still have that thing. Best built string winder I've ever owned.
That must be terrifying, knowing that all of a sudden you don't have the gear that you need.
Yeah, and it, you know, unfortunately, it happens. It happens occasionally, not too often, but often enough to be frustrating, you know. And then especially, you know, we don't want anybody to get hurt. We had our friends with Shania Twain, you know, their bus flipped up in Canada. Fortunately, no one was killed. Some people were hurt. But, you know, the trials and tribulations of touring in the wintertime, especially in places like Canada and Europe, where the winters are really harsh. And we still try to do it, you know.
There was one other story that we were chatting about last night that was kind of interesting. And I know we don't have the picture right now when I was talking to Dan O'Neill, he had a picture of Kyle's
Oh
rig
yeah, Kyle
Matchbox
Cook,
20.
sure. Mhm.
But you said that you had to fill in, and what I thought was so interesting is this is what we hear all the time, because the Mastermind is so, it's like a universal, you can use it in so many different ways. People use it in ways that we hadn't intended. And you said that it took you a while to wrap your head around the way they used it. How was that different than what you usually see?
Probably the best thing about the Mastermind is its ultimate flexibility. You're not required to do it any certain way. You have everything there to put together your show your way, in a way that you're comfortable with. And if that's unusual, that's okay. I had the pleasure of going out and doing 2 shows looking after Kyle last month. And I have some history with those guys as well years ago. So I got out there, and Kyle had this massive rig, kind of the last of the gargantuans. You don't see too many. Well, if you guys remember that rig that I had with Peter Frampton, it was kind of like that. It was, drawer after drawer after drawer of pedals, 2 amp heads of one kind, 2 amp heads of another kind, 2 amp heads of a third kind, 2 amp heads of a fourth kind, load resistor DI boxes, PDI 03s, everything coming through your effects gizmos. I think 3 of them in there, and the GT22. And Kyle's interesting way of running it, which I couldn't really understand the first time I looked at it, and I had to go through it with Mark at Kyle's studio in Nashville, and the 3 of us went through it. And really all it ended up being was he had this thing in, I want to say he had it in a set list mode. Is that, what am I looking at? Yeah, it's changed a little bit. There's a different input selector in there now. I think maybe a couple of different pedals in there now. But yeah, that's the main rack. He set the 22 up in kind of a set list mode, I guess you would say. And each button was in, I would call it chronological order. So each button from top left to bottom right were laid out as parts of songs. So the first button is the intro to the first song. The second button is the verse of the first song. The third button is the pre-chorus of the first song. The fourth button is the chorus, and onward throughout all of the instant access buttons on the Mastermind. Now, up on the right-hand corner, he still had his save, and those buttons up there were the same. But everything else, all the way down, the bottom right button on his controller is nothing more than a next button. It just simply steps through each of those parts of the song. So he likes to have a controller. I had one on the side of the stage, but he actually manipulated the one on stage. And then as I'm watching him during the first day of rehearsal, he's only hitting one button the whole time, and it's that bottom right button. And that's when I'm looking at mine and I'm going, that makes sense. So he would scroll through, and each part of the song, he'd hit that next button. And then at the end, you hit it again, and it brings you to the first patch on the second song. So it works through the entire set list in chronological order. Each of the patches are labeled as song and part. And it made perfect sense at that point. I've never seen it done that way. I've always been kind of more of a Bradshaw, ground control pro, those kind of things. And my GT16 is kind of set up more along those lines, where I scroll through songs, and then I have parts 5. Well, actually, I have banks of songs, and then each of the 5 preset buttons are individual songs. And then I have my instant access button set up as you would a Bradshaw controller or a ground control controller, in that I can punch in, and I do during the show. I've got different drive pedals in the Axe effects that I punch in. I've got a really nice chorus doubler that I use for the Love Bites bass sound, things of that nature. But each song preset then calls up all of the internal effects that I'm using within that sound. So that's how I set mine up, and that's how my brain works. I like to be able to see which effects I'm using at any given time.
Yeah.
Sure.
So Ron, had you seen this before? Like Matchbox 20, is anybody else doing it that way? Or do they usually do it the way Aiden does it?
That was the whole idea, when I was designing this stuff. I didn't, it's like I know different people wanted to do different things. And so I wasn't going to like try to, it's trying to leave it open. So it's like, well, set it up the way you want to set it up, put your buttons where you want and and let people do that. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely I wouldn't be surprised if some other people were doing somewhat similar things, but it's, it's definitely not common, and I couldn't just throw out another name of someone who's actually doing that. But it makes sense. It's just not the typical setup, especially for anyone who came from the the Bradshaw world where they're
The old
used
school.
to that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, the beauty of this monster that you've created is that you're not stuck with doing it anyway. You can do it whatever way you want to. And I think that's what I see more and more of them every day out on the road. We do a lot of festivals where there's, 8, 10, 12, 14 bands on 3 stages. And the majority of them now are using your products. I was the last of the 3 guys in the Def Leppard camp to jump on board the Mastermind bandwagon. And, I was kind of in a place where, do I need to do this? Do I not? What are the benefits? What aren't? And Jeff, our drum tech, said, let me just show you how this works, because that's what he uses for the drums. And I went, oh yeah, okay, all right. And it's so amazing, much like the Axe effects, in that being able to, with any of the old products, the biggest drawback was saving the information and backing up the information. And in the event that something went pear-shaped, you had a backup, and we never did. And I remember nightmare gigs where, one of these products, would go down in front of a stadium full of 55,000 people. And it's the main brain in a rig. I flew out to do some Metallica shows with Guns N' Roses on that big stadium run they did years ago. And I flew to Dallas on a show day. And now I hadn't been with them in a while. And I got to the show, and Kirk's guitar tech had a heart-related incident and had to go. So they called me, and I came out. I took the lid off the rack as we were I got there for load-in, and bits and pieces of rack gear came out onto my feet. They were not screwed into the rack even. And I don't know why. I don't know how. I don't know if it was rough riding or what, but it was hanging by the audio plugs. And as I'm looking at it, they just went and came out. And the thing hit the ground. I couldn't even believe what I was looking at. Otherwise I would have grabbed it. But the only thing that was holding it in the rack were the 1/4-inch audio plugs, and the weight of the thing just eventually just worked it out. Down it went. Man. So those are the crazy days. That was a long time ago. And I had a couple of different units fail that were custom units. And, when you have a failure like that, and it's the brains of the rig, and you can't get a replacement, you try to get a replacement, and you're told, I'm sorry, I don't make those anymore. It could be frightening,
Oh yeah.
So again, a big part of the Mastermind for me is, and again, I can plug my computer into it, so I guess I've kind of been a closet geek all my life, because I love this technology, and to be able to go in there and manipulate everything within the Mastermind on my MacBook and just hit, transfer that stinking file to the box and go, or put it on a USB stick and then a separate set of gear. And in 5 minutes, I'm going, I'm up, I've got exactly what I had in America or Australia or somewhere else.
From being able to talk to you guys early on and just say, well, what do you need? What, and just people just talking about, having to, button mash their configuration into their MIDI controller and all that. And, and so it's like, we need to be able to back up. We need to be able to save it. We need an easy way to edit that's faster.
Yeah. That you've got songs that change on a moment's notice and you've got to change the order.
or
Yeah.
change set list changes, things like that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's, it was nice to get the, it was
Well, we
nice to
were
get the
lucky.
information before I started designing it. So it was actually, a little more easy to make it actually happen.
And we're lucky. There were a lot of great people that went before us that made gear, and we were able to at least find out what people liked and didn't like and what was next. And we came so much further after them that we were able to use technology that they probably couldn't at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Leveraging the new stuff for sure helps a lot.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
We should probably wrap this up. So you've got some interesting things that you do on the side. You're a rig builder in Nashville. When you're not
I am when I have time to do that. I've done some rigs for some folks and consulted on some rigs for some folks. And I did a build for the two guys in Taylor Swift's band when she was getting started. She was becoming big, but not quite.
Yeah. So I don't know who was using it at the time, but we had heard the one of the techs say that they had to pick out pink confetti out of the effect gizmos, I think.
That situation that's something that we all deal with. And not just pink, every color of confetti you can imagine. There may have been a Kiss show a week before and confetti still falling from the ceiling from that show.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. So yeah, confetti's a universal tech problem in our business. Yeah.
So how would somebody get a hold of you to be a rig if they wanted you to build a rig?
So I have a Facebook page, easy to find there, and I have an Instagram page that's mine as well. And I touched on my other endeavor. I'm also a real estate agent here in the Nashville area.
I wanted to talk about that because you are very unique for a real estate agent. I mean, how cool to get to talk to the Def Leppard or all the other different bands, the tech, and have him sell you, or buy or sell your house. Especially if you're a guitar player, be so much fun to talk to you.
I'm not the stereotypical real estate agent, that's for sure.
So what was the name of the real estate email that
so my first broker, the mentor that I had in my first brokerage, finding out about my background, she said, "You are the rock and music real estate agent, or the rocking music realtor." So she suggested that I get my own domain, which I have done, and it's rockingmusiccity.realtor.com. And I can be reached there at Aidan, AIDAN, at rockingmusiccity.realtor.com, all together, all one word. I have a separate Instagram account and a separate Facebook account for my real estate business. And as I'm touring around the world, I'll post something that has to do with real estate. And then the next day I'll post something from, hello from Budapest, just me and, 55,000 of my closest friends, or, Bogota, Colombia, or somewhere else. So I kind of give everybody these little snippets of life on the road in amongst what interest rates are doing and what inventory looks like, and the Nashville real estate market being what it is, and things of that nature. So I try to lighten it up. And so I don't act or dress like the stereotypical real estate.
Well, you're more of a guitar tech kind of.
Yeah.
Well, we should wrap it up, and we will put all of that information in the description below. But if you've got questions about the rig, we went over some of it, but I'm sure there's other questions that people have. Put it down below.
I'd be more than happy to answer any questions, any follow-up questions. Just send them on. Happy to do it.
Well, thank you so much. And we really enjoyed this. And the best stories. Yeah. Now we're on two dislocated shoulders being a tech. We'll see how often that happens.
You're going to find that it happens more than you realize, and more than I certainly care to admit. Thank you guys. I want everybody to know this, watching this, that these products truly are amazing. I'm sure a lot of you have them already or aspire to have them. And both of you have been not only producing these products, but being there, more importantly, when I've needed you, certainly, and when others have needed you in a support role. Ron, you try not to get to it. You like to do your thing, and it's great that you do, because your thing is so amazing. But you do take the time when it's necessary to answer the questions and concerns, and I certainly appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And I know that the guys that I work with do too. All of us out here in the tech world really appreciate both of you and what you do.
Oh, well, thank you so
Excellent.
much.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, remember, ask your questions below in the comments, and thanks
Yeah.
so much.